This weekend, the 30th season for Major League Soccer gets underway, and I've had the privilege of working with the Colorado Rapids in one capacity or another for 27 of those 30 years, the bulk of those being as volunteer chaplain to the team. Hello, I'm Rev Brad. You're listening to the Soccer Chaplains United podcast from the Touchline. As a volunteer chaplain, I find it extremely important to pray for and bless much of what I find in football and soccer. And I talked about that a few weeks ago, namely the athletes that perform on the field, the coaches that instruct, and the staff and workers that support the team in the stadium environments, and even sometimes the fans. So today, I wanted to share a short blessing for the work of football as we get set to kick off the season. Thanks for joining me. We begin right after this.
He's found the space, and he's found the back of the net.
Just a little off foot, thinking he's going to go far post. Not strong enough with his right hand.
Whips that one in. Far post, almost made him ends, and they have. He has the hat-trick. The second in his career. The third of the night. The hat-trick hero.
Talked about you're not going to be able to sustain that kind of pressure.
To the corner. Goes towards the near post. And you're the angle, and what a goal! What a goal!
In the early days of my work as a volunteer chaplain to the Rapids, I had a number of things that I had to grapple with, and one of the largest was the sense that this is a game. Yes, soccer is known as the beautiful game, but I was going to seminary and training for the pastorate, and there was a particular idea or sense of what ministry would or should have looked like for me. So I want you to imagine a stained-glass, windowed building with a pulpit, melodic church music, and preaching to a few hundred people on a Sunday morning. And you might get a little close to what the original picture was for me as I enrolled in seminary and I began the process of following a sense of God's calling into ministry. But fast forward to today, and the image of stained glass is replaced by a stadium video board. The music varies from anthemic to pop rock and is blasted on stadium speakers. It's a raucous crowd of 10 to 15,000, and while I podcast regularly, I preach pretty infrequently. In those early days of beginning this work, I often felt, as did many of the young athletes and coaches that I worked with, a bit of derision around the context of serving in this capacity. Chaplain? I thought you were going to be a pastor. Soccer chaplain? What's that? What do you even do? It's just a game. Well, fortunately, in spite of some of the questions and misnomers, I often had an opportunity to explain and sometimes even show people the work that I do, the work that I've done. For some of the young coaches and athletes that I worked with, their parents and certain friends would say some similar things, and some of it leaned much more negative. Things like, when will you grow up? When are you going to get a real job? When will you stop chasing these hopeless dreams? I remember some ways we would comfort and console each other, as we believed that we were largely misunderstood for our undertakings, and each of us had a sense or a feeling that we had been called and equipped to do the work and be in the environment of soccer that God had brought us into. Now, some of us started in different places of the journey in getting to that, but we all kind of arrived in similar ways in similar stages. The list has grown too numerous today to recount, but many an athlete and coach in soccer has told me, Rev, this is just how I'm wired. This is just how I believe God has made me to be. And as we would walk together on a journey of understanding, we'd have to balance things like identity and passion and also to understand things like the Imago Dei, that there had been something shaped and formed in us, myself as chaplain of soccer and others as athletes, coaches, and staffers, executives in the game. Now, soccer in the U.S. has risen into one of the top 5 sports, both for viewership and for participation. In terms of participation, though, soccer is number 2 behind basketball. So a lot of people are involved in playing. The sport itself has grown immensely into a thriving industry. The professional soccer leagues now boast nearly 150 teams on both the men's and women's side when you add them all up. The number of collegiate teams is over 1,700, and there's even more youth clubs. I don't even know what the number is. Thousands, tens of thousands of youth clubs. Kids, families playing soccer. Now, in short, that means there's a lot of work. There's a lot of opportunities. There's many opportunities to ply one's trade and to be in and around the game. And sometimes for those that have been in the game for a long time, they transition and migrate and step into new roles, but they still stay around this game that they love. But as is the case for most people, one of the key, critical, crucial things that we need is we need to know that our work and the work we do is worthy. Let me say that again. People need to know and feel that our work is worthwhile and valued. And because soccer is a game, it can often come with a different kind of scrutiny. Well, I want to share with you someone that's been really helpful for me. American Christian author and Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner is someone I've leaned heavily on in helping myself and others to understand this work in the industry of soccer. Allow me to read this short quote. It's Buechner's definition of vocation from his book, Wishful Thinking. Buechner writes, vocation. It comes from the Latin vocare, to call, and means the work a person is called to by God. There are all different kinds of voices calling you to all different kinds of work. And the problem is to find out which is the voice of God rather than of society, say, or the superego or self-interest. By and large, a good rule for finding out is this. The kind of work God usually calls you to is the kind of work that A, you need most to do, and B, that the world most needs to have done. If you really get a kick out of your work, you've presumably met requirement A. But if your work is writing TV deodorant commercials, the chances are you've missed requirement B. On the other hand, if your work is being a doctor in a leper colony, you've probably met requirement B. But if most of the time you're bored and depressed by it, the chances are you have not only bypassed A, but probably aren't helping your patients much either. Neither the hair shirt nor the soft berth will do. The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Let me say that again. The place God calls us to is the place where our deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Well, I've found Buechner's litmus test so helpful. There have been athletes who, when coming to the end of their playing career, have wondered, what is it that they ought to do next? For many, they choose to remain in the sport in some form or fashion because it's what they know, or it's all they've known. A minority have chosen another route or another vocation because they also desire to have other aspects of their life flourish, and as they come to understand it, there's a calling, and the traits and some of the things that they learned as athletes translate over. They get into those other things, but getting away sometimes from the game allows them to get away from the rigors and pressures of the sport, the constant travel, the cuts of competition, and so on and so on, and so many of the more difficult things. In the process of discernment, I think that the two Buechner tests help frame the questions that help us to understand what tends to be most critical. That is, what do I most need to do? And secondly, what does the world, or God, need most to have done? And what I find beautiful is that the place of God's calling is the merging. It's the confluence of our soul's gladness and the world's deepest needs. So, for me, as a volunteer soccer chaplain, there are many things in and about the beautiful game that present themselves as quote-unquote world's deep hunger. Fatherless boys, aimless men, physically fit bodies, and spiritually anemic souls, just to name a few. I've also in these years come to know that I am wired as a pastor, as a shepherd. I'm a caregiver that strives for excellence. And my previous work in soccer, as a media relations guy, has let me see some of the great needs that exist within the community and within the sport of the beautiful game. The wrestling that I once did with "it's just a game" still rears its ugly head every now and again. Sometimes I feel a temptation to consider a different line of work as it relates to pastoring and the church. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to raise money and go out and ask people to help support the work that I do, and I wish I could just draw a salary at a church or something like that. But in the moments of analysis that I find myself doing, usually every year, I find that the work I'm about, the work that God has called me to, is worthy, and it is where I'm called to be. So with this in mind, friends, I hope and pray that you too, if you're struggling, if you're in that place of trying to understand, is this work that I am in really what I'm supposed to do? Maybe you use those 2 Buechner tests. Do you feel a great satisfaction in the work that you do? And is there a great need for it? Probably you're in the right place. Probably you're in the right place. So as we close out today, I want to close this with a short blessing. I've adapted this from Ray Simpson's Celtic Blessings, and it's a work blessing. No matter if you're a chaplain or a coach, an athlete, maybe you're a parent or a fan or someone else around the beautiful game, I believe we could pray this prayer and say these words with conviction. And if we've done the work to understand that God has called us here, maybe here is the sport of soccer, the beautiful game, then let us pray in the spirit of the psalmist that God continually establish the work of our hands and maybe our feet. Well, hear now these words. May my football be faithful. May my football be honest. May my football be blessed. May my football bless others. May my football bless you. May the wealth and work of the football world be available to all and for the exploitation of none. May managers, athletes, staff, and fans work together like fingers on a hand and like toes on the foot. Amen. Well, friends, I want you to have a blessed soccer season ahead. This is Rev Brad coming to you from the touchline.